Happy Friday, folks. Senior editor Mackenzie Taylor here on the Texan's weekly Roundup podcast. This week, the team discusses a judge vacating Biden administration rules allowing transgender bathroom use and child gender modification. The Fifth Circuit ruling the Biden administration's pause on federal land drilling may continue. The New York City mayor lashing out as Texas sends thousands of non-citizens to the Big Apple. The GOP focusing on public safety in Harris County ahead of November. $21 billion in local bonds on ballots across Texas. 600,000 illegal immigrants evading capture at the southern border. Houston ISD challenging the Texas Education Agency in state Supreme Court. Wells Fargo receiving a $5 million state grant to build a $455 million campus in Irving. And San Antonio firing the police officer who shot an unarmed teen after mistaking his identity. As always, if you have questions for our team, DM us on Twitter or email us at editor@thetexan.news. We'd love to answer your questions on a future podcast. Thanks for listening and enjoy this episode. Well, howdy, folks. It's Mackenzie here with Brad and Hayden and Hudson and Rob on another episode of our weekly Roundup podcast. Gentlemen, welcome back to the pod. Hudson, we have some sad news this week. You are you moved here to Austin to work for the Texan. You're moving back to San Antonio to be closer to family, friends, etc. So we're gonna miss you. I'm gonna
miss y'all, man.
It's gonna be, but this is your last podcast, so we'll send you out with a bang. What that bang will be, I'm not quite sure.
Okay.
Maybe these kolaches on the table. Maybe talking about those bears we talked about last week. I think that's probably what the bang will be.
That's going to be a great way to close it out.
Well, wonderful. Okay, gentlemen. Well, after that, let's go ahead and jump into the news here. We have some content here to jump into. And Hudson, you're going to be the first one to kick us off. A federal court struck down multiple Biden administration rules. Explain what those rules were.
So, yeah, the first rule, it was the same decision that both were struck down. Very interesting. But the first rule was an Equal Employment Opportunity Commission rule that prohibited employers from firing their employees based on the actions, dress, or other conduct related to that individual's gender identity or sexual orientation. So essentially, under this rule, an employer cannot dictate how an individual should dress, what bathroom they should use if that bathroom is the opposite of their biological sex, and they cannot dictate other conduct of employees based on their sexual orientation or gender identity. So the EEOC came to this rule by using the Supreme Court decision from 2020, Bostock versus Clayton County. And that established that under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, employers cannot discriminate against employees' sexual orientation and gender identity, including that as one of the protections under that Title VII. But the decision clearly states that this is merely related to that individual's actual identity and not their associated conduct as it relates to their role as an employee of a business. So this is how the court viewed the issue, and they ruled in favor of the plaintiffs, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton in the state of Texas. The court agreed that there indeed is a difference between being transgender or gay and the conduct associated with that. An employer now cannot be forced to allow people to use restrooms that do not match their biological sex and can dictate the dress code of their employees a little more.
Okay, so what was the second rule that was struck down?
So the second rule is a Health and Human Services Department rule that was issued in direct response to the actions of the state of Texas. So earlier this year, Governor Greg Abbott issued a directive for the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services to investigate cases of child gender modification as child abuse. So following this order, Ken Paxton also released an opinion that corroborated this notion that child gender modification was indeed child abuse. So the HHS retaliated by issuing a rule that claimed that denying a child access to these procedures and these medications likely violated Section 1557 of the Affordable Care Act. So this refers to the ACA's prohibition on discrimination under all protected categories, similar to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And they've also tried to add in sexual orientation and gender identity into this Section 1557. But the court did not agree with this whatsoever, and they claimed that HHS did not have sufficient evidence to connect their rule to Section 1557. The court labeled the rule actually arbitrary and capricious.
Quite some strong words there. Well,
Yeah.
Hudson, thank you for your coverage. Bradley, we're coming to you. A long-running lawsuit over a Biden administration executive order came to a head this week. What happened?
So the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals vacated a previous lower court ruling concerning the Biden administration's pause on new and renewed leases for oil and gas drilling on federal lands. The district court had paused the pause, saying that it lacked any congressional say, but the appeals court said the lower court failed to adequately define what a pause is in this context, ordered by the White House, and remanded the case back to district court, which means it's not over. It'll continue to be fought. Likely the district court will just issue a new opinion on it, issuing the same order and more clearly defining what they mean by a pause in this case. This executive order was released the week that Biden took office, and so it's been in the courts for about that long, and still no resolution to it.
Okay, so what's the broader context of the energy industry right now?
So this order would prohibit, it directs the Department of the Interior to kind of set a moratorium on new leasing agreements for oil and gas drillers on any federal land. And in Texas, there is not a huge percentage of federal land in the state, but there is some. And the American Petroleum Institute, obviously, they are opposed to this, but they estimated that if kept in perpetuity, the executive order would cost about 120,000 oil and gas jobs in Texas. Overall, though, this is one of multiple items from the Biden administration that is kind of at loggerheads with the oil and gas industry. The Biden administration has a goal of reaching net zero emission status by 2050 and reducing emissions below 2005 levels 40% by 2030. Now, it's also important to note that we're already halfway there to that 40% number, just mainly by natural gas supplanting coal generation. And so that's without any of these huge policy changes by the Biden administration. Another order that occurred the same week that this one did when he first took office was cancellation of the Keystone XL pipeline permit. And so those have kind of gone hand in hand. But overall, the Biden administration is trying to kind of push forward the country away from using fossil fuels as much as it does. And obviously that has driven quite the recoil from the industry that the country relies on so much.
We haven't heard about the Keystone Pipeline in a hot minute. I feel like it has not been in the news lately.
Well, because it's dead, at least for now. I think last I heard, the developer of it was trying to figure out a new way to go about the same project. But as it was then constituted and for years constituted, it's not no longer in existence, no longer in the project development stage. We actually talked about the Keystone Pipeline with Wayne Christian on the podcast that will go out next week. So we'd talk about that a little bit.
Awesome. Well, good teaser there, folks. Make sure to tune into the pod. I mean, every week we always talk about such fun stories on the pod, but particularly as election season ramps up, we'll have more and more interviews with elected officials and candidates. We interviewed Democrat Luke Warford, Wayne Christian's Democrat opponent, just a few weeks ago. And so now the incumbent Republican was in office, and Brad did a great interview with him. So make sure to listen to that. Bradley, thank you for that coverage. Hayden, Texas and other states have sent non-citizens to New York City to alleviate the economic burden of illegal immigration. How has the New York City Mayor Eric Adams reacted to this?
He declared a state of emergency last Friday because of the program that Texas has launched, as well as other states, to send thousands of non-citizens from the Lone Star State to New York City. He said that 17,000 non-citizens have flooded into the city's homeless shelters and services, requiring free meals, free beds, and other resources that the city of New York is required by law to provide due to their right to shelter laws. These are people who are not legally permitted to obtain work, so they legally cannot provide for themselves, and the government there is required to provide for them. He said 1/5 of the people in New York City's system are non-citizens. That is an overwhelming portion of the taxpayer dollars in New York going to people who are not even citizens. Not only are they not residents of New York, but they're not even citizens of the country. Adams did call it a crisis and said it is burning through our city's budget. He said he expects it to cost New York City $1 billion before the end of the fiscal year. Texas has not sent all 17,000, but most of those were sent by Texas and El Paso. One of the quotes that he said, one of the things he said during the news conference declaring the state of emergency was notable. He said, quote, "Our right to shelter laws, our social services, and our values are being exploited by others for political gain. New Yorkers are angry. I am angry too. We have not asked for this. There was never any agreement to take on the job of supporting thousands of asylum seekers. This responsibility was simply handed to us without warning as buses began showing up. There's no playbook for this, no precedent," end quote. And of course, that's the argument that governors like Greg Abbott and Ron DeSantis have been making since Biden took office. That is, that illegal immigration is imposing an economic burden on Texas and Florida and other states that has not been asked for. And Abbott has been seeking to draw attention to that by sending illegal immigrants who have federal paperwork and are non-citizens to these big city jurisdictions so that they should shoulder some of the economic burden.
Got it. So has the governor responded to Adams' comments?
In a statement that they sent us on Monday, his spokesperson said, quote, "The true emergency is on our nation's southern border, where small Texas border towns are overrun and overwhelmed by hundreds of migrants every single day as the Biden administration dumps them in our communities. Instead of fear-mongering and complaining about a few thousand migrants in his sanctuary city, Mayor Adams should call on President Biden to do his job and secure the border, something the president continues failing to do. Governor Abbott's invitation is still open for Mayor Adams to visit the border and see the actual crisis firsthand," end quote. And she also called him an absolute hypocrite because he is essentially saying that New York City can't handle this. Texas has sent 8,100 non-citizens to Washington, D.C. as of last Friday, and 3,100 to New York City, and 920 have been sent to Chicago. The city of El Paso, with its busing program, has also sent 1,000 non-citizens since August.
Got it. Well, thank you for your coverage of that, and very fascinating to watch this political discourse, particularly in that the policy differences between these cities that are being that are where these non-citizens are being sent are so different from here in Texas.
And I do want to add, the mayor said that they are helping all of them, but they are asking for additional resources from the state of New York and from the federal government because of the amount of people that are being sent there at one time. And he also said that the entire country should be stepping up to the plate, and it shouldn't just be New York City that is required to shoulder this. But one more fact that I want to add on top of this is 17,000 people out of the millions upon millions of people that live in New York City. And he has said before, or the New York City Council is almost more like a state legislature. So this is a very large jurisdiction, but in September of last year, there were 30,000 illegal immigrants converging on Valverde County, which has a population of about 36,000 residents.
Wow.
So if you take the proportions and compare them, this is an overwhelmingly less serious problem than what some of the border jurisdictions here in Texas have faced. And I think that's exactly the point that Abbott and these other officials are trying to make.
17,000 among millions of New Yorkers and 17,000 of just among hundreds of thousands of people crossing the border illegally. Right. So certainly context that's necessary to understand what's going on here in a broader sense. So Hayden, thank you so much for that. Brad, as we near the November election, candidates are firming up their messaging for this home stretch. I feel like it actually has been quieter than a lot of other general elections in the past. That's just my interpretation.
Well, there's no presidential election on the ballot, so yeah.
It's very true. But midterms usually can get pretty spicy, right? So for Republicans, they're focused focusing heavily on public safety, especially in Harris County. And one poll shows that may be paying dividends. What's going down?
So a poll commissioned by the Defend Texas Liberty PAC that's run by former state rep Jonathan Stickland, funded by conservative megadonors Tim Dunn and Ferris Wilkes. That PAC has played a lot, especially in the primaries, the GOP primaries this year, and now they're getting involved. I wrote a piece, I think we talked about this last week, on their increased involvement on behalf of Governor Abbott. Maybe more so just against Beto O'Rourke in the governor's race. But they put out a poll this week that showed Democrat Beto O'Rourke only has a 2-point lead over Abbott in Harris County. Now, it's notable because Abbott lost the county by 6 in 2018, and I believe 4 in his previous race in 2014. A reason why the margin may be so small in Harris County is because of the focus Republicans have made on police funding and lax bail policy affecting public safety and the crime rise. Holly's got a lot of coverage on this stuff, whether it's on the county judge race between Alex Mueller and Lena Hidalgo, or just the general crime trend down there. So check out her stuff for more information on that. But this poll showed that Republican Alex Mueller is up 4 points on Democrat Lena Hidalgo. And those
Which is
two,
a very big deal.
Yes. And from my observation, Defend Texas Liberty PAC has put out a lot of polls this year, and we know that polls can be they can be accurate, they can be wildly inaccurate. They have seemed to be pretty accurate in their polling and mirroring a lot of the more establishment polling firms, such as University of Houston, Mark P. Jones, what he puts out. So I think it's not worth just throwing away immediately, and it's worth asking a question why this is showing such a close race in Harris County. And I think those two issues, police funding and the bail policy, are really, they're helping Mueller and they're helping Greg Abbott, and both of those candidates have really campaigned on those in Harris County. Obviously, Mueller's campaigning in Harris County, but Abbott himself has gone down there and done multiple press conferences about lax bail policy and police stuff in that county, and it's the state's largest county. And in addition to the head-to-head matchups, this poll found that a majority of respondents agreed that bail reform has, quote, increased crime in Harris County, and that police funding should be increased. There's a fight over the county's budget for constables down there right now. Again, Holly's got more coverage on that, but this is definitely a trend, and it is the preeminent, public safety is the preeminent issue in the elections down there right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And going back to 2018 and these previous years where Democrats just wiped the floor with Republicans, it'll be very interesting to see what happens in this midterm election. And we really don't, we don't know. And Beto O'Rourke is certainly fundraising heavily. He certainly is putting up a big fight against Governor Abbott, who by all accounts for several years now has been a very strong Republican leader for the state in terms of electorally, right? I mean, he's really kind of brought a lot of down ballot.
He hasn't had a close election.
No, absolutely not. And Beto's an entirely different story.
Yep.
And the governor certainly is more embattled, previously having had several formidable primary opponents as well. There's a lot going on, and it really will be interesting to see where all the chips fall, because a lot is at play. Yeah.
And Harris County is somewhere that O'Rourke should win pretty handily if he wants to have any hope of unseating the incumbent. He's tried to,
which is an uphill battle, to be sure.
Absolutely. Texas is an R54 state based on our ratings. So that right there gives Abbott an 8-point advantage.
Yeah.
But O'Rourke has much of this campaign gone to rural areas that are Republican strongholds, and seems to be a strategy to try and cut into Abbott's advantage in those areas. Because, the vote occurs across the whole state, not just in Harris County, and not just in, Amarillo or the rest of the Panhandle. And so, if the strategy behind that would be if he can make gains in those areas, reducing the typical windfall of votes that Republicans get, that Abbott gets in those places, and he can count on his typical return in, let's say, Harris County, then it might put him within spitting distance. But if Harris County is not what it should be for Beto, then that's going to erase any gains that he might make in rural areas. So this is a very interesting note to follow, and I'm not sure what it's going to turn out to be on election day. Harris County is a blue county. It has been that way for a while now. But these two issues seem to be turning a lot of heads, and we'll see how much legs they give to Mueller there and Abbott cutting into whatever lead Beto has there.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Bradley. Hey, listeners, if you enjoy our podcast each week, subscribe to The Texan. We're not funded by corporate interests or big donors, so we rely on the subscriptions of everyday Texans to keep churning out news. When you subscribe, you'll get access to stories like all the ones we've been discussing on this podcast as soon as they're published, so that you can stay informed, up to speed, and ready to vote at the ballot box. A subscription is $9 monthly, but you can save by purchasing an annual subscription for $90, which comes out to just $7.50 per month. And we just brought back a fan favorite merch item. New subscribers will now get a free Fake News Stops Here mug, by far our most popular merch item of all time. For more details, visit thetexan.news/subscribe or click the URL in the description of this podcast. Now let's jump back into chatting about the stories. But first, I do want to say, I want to call out Daniel Friend, who is the mastermind behind our marketing strategy here at the Texan, former reporter. Now he's our marketing media manager. On repeat, every time I say this little blurb in our podcast, he wants me to say that subscribe so that we can feed Brad. Because he wants me to say, you think Brad's grumpy on the podcast? Well, imagine him not having food to put on the table. Imagine a hungry Brad. Subscribe to the Texan. That's what he wants me to say. I wanted to win some bonus points with you, Brad, since I rake you over the coals every podcast. So I thought I'd out Daniel and place the blame on him instead of, it coming just at me for no reason at all.
I mean, you could have gone with subscribe. That way Brad can feed Winston.
Oh.
Yeah.
Please, folks.
Appeal to the heartstrings.
This is our direct appeal. Please subscribe so that Brad can feed Winston. If you don't know Winston, we should put him up on our staff page because we have a photo of him with our background, or the Texan background. It's awesome. He's a really sweet little Wheaton Terrier, and he's adorable, and he has health problems and needs vet bills paid. Oh, man.
That's
subscribe, folks. There you go. Okay,
I'm pretty sure most of Brad's paycheck goes directly to the vet and to whoever takes care of Winston.
I just have a direct deposit on the 2nd of every month into the vet.
It's just a retainer. You're the vet on retainer. Oh, man. Okay. Well, folks, thanks for listening to that. Bradley, we are going to chat with you about the news. Next month, there will be over 150 bond proposals from local governments on ballots across the state. Talk to us and give us some details on some of those.
So the single largest proposition is Austin ISD's $2.3 billion item to fund building repairs and security upgrades. The second largest is Lamar Consolidated Independent School District. They have one on the ballot for $1.3 billion for building construction and more buses. And so many of these entities will have multiple propositions on each ballot, some of them up to 5, at least that I recall looking through. And the reason for that is, they separate items for things like building schools from those for like building stadiums. And that way, there's an electoral strategy there. That way they don't all go down in one. If you have, let's say, a very unpopular stadium project, that doesn't drag down the other ones.
Right.
But also it's just different spending. And in my opinion, it's appropriately done that way because, if you're trying to shove $2.5 billion with all these different purposes that are not really alike at all, that's not really a good way to go about things. So that's why they split them out. But some of them just have one item on the ballot. Some of them have 5. But it's important to note that every one of these, if approved, will result in a property tax increase. They wouldn't be on the ballot if they didn't. And nearly 2/3 of the items are from school districts, which collectively total $15 billion of the overall $21 billion in debt that is on the ballots. I list out every one of these data gotten from the Bond Review Board from Texas, and you can see the entity that's requesting it, the amount, the proposition number, so you can see if they have multiple on the ballot, and the purpose. And so I would recommend you check that out.
Awesome. Well, Bradley, thank you. Hayden, we're coming back to you. A recent report stated that hundreds of thousands have evaded arrest by border agents. Give us some details about your story.
You know what's weird? I've been doing this podcast for like 2.5 years now, and I still get stage fright before every one of my segments.
Really?
I do. It's weird.
Oh my gosh.
But Fox News reported that one of their sources said there were 600,000 gotaways during fiscal year 2022, and that is in addition to the 2.5 million nationwide enforcement encounters with illegal immigrants, 2.2 million of which were on the southern border. That doesn't include September's numbers, which are forthcoming, that will probably will be published in the coming few weeks, and that will shed more light on the overall picture of illegal immigration in fiscal year 2022, which there were more enforcement encounters last fiscal year than in any year previously recorded by the Department of Homeland Security. And Republicans have been taking full advantage of that fact politically in the past few months. It's an issue that polls well with them, and as we get closer to the general election, most of their campaigning and campaign rhetoric has focused on that. There were only about 389,000 gotaways in fiscal year 2021, so it is definitely an increase if the Fox report is true, and that includes people who were somehow detected by Border Patrol, but not detected in the sense that their identity was known and they were able to arrest them. This is an estimate of the number of people who were able to get over the border and Border Patrol knew about them, but couldn't track them down and arrest them. And hundreds of thousands of people, I said earlier, well, we'll talk about that in a second, but that is the population of a small state, 600,000 people, and gives a picture of the overall magnitude of illegal immigration.
How else has the Biden administration been releasing non-citizens into the country?
There is a program that the Biden administration has used called humanitarian parole that allows individuals to be admitted into the country and bypass the normal asylum process when there are extenuating circumstances and emergencies that justify it in the federal government's eyes. According to a report last month by ABC News, there were only 11 people total granted humanitarian parole into the U.S. Before August of 2021. But from August 2021 to June of this year, 250,000 people were paroled into the United States, and many of those people were from Afghanistan and Ukraine, and everybody knows why. So that is about the population of the city of Irving. And that is a program that the Biden administration has used that was not previously used. And it first became known when Fox reported last year in October that about 160 non-citizens had been paroled and given notice to report and let into the country. The Transportation Security Administration also said earlier this year that illegal immigrants are allowed to use arrest warrants as forms of identification at security checkpoints, and they do not even use immigration status as that's not even a box that they check in their screening process. And I thought it was important to place all of that information in context. And these numbers were only released because the federal government was required to provide monthly updates to the federal judge that was considering the lawsuit against the Remain in Mexico policy's cancellation. So that's why these numbers were available. ABC reported that the last numbers that were available were in June, and that was the last update that was provided to Judge Kaczmarek in the Remain in Mexico suit, which Texas and Missouri ultimately lost that because the Supreme Court is allowing the federal government to cancel that policy.
Yeah. Wow. Well, Hayden, thank you for providing all that context. Very important. And I think a lot of mainstream outlets either just fail to report or just gloss over a lot of these details. So thank you for covering that so thoroughly for our readers and our listeners. Hudson, we are coming back to you, my friend. Houston ISD is suing the Texas Education Agency to stop them from replacing their school board. Shout out to Holly Hansen, who's covered this issue extensively. And thank you, Hudson, for picking it up this week. Give us some background on where the case is at.
So HISD has a number of schools that are consistently graded with a D or an F on TEA performance ratings, which essentially evaluate how well schools are doing from year to year. So consistently receiving a lot of bad grades on multiple schools. Wheatley High School in particular has received F grades for around a decade until this year, actually, where they got a C. But additionally, the HISD board has been accused of multiple legal violations, including violations of the Texas Open Meetings Law and cronyism, giving contracts to friends and other colleagues. So given these issues, TEA Commissioner Mike Morath has pushed to oust the board to replace him with a board of managers. The lawsuit is 3 years running now and has reached the Supreme Court of Texas. So at issue is whether TEA Commissioner Mike Morath has the legal authority to oust the board. When the legal challenge began, the laws on the books did not clearly allow for the total replacement of the board. And it was pretty vague with the wording with that. But given this, the courts initially sided with HISD and granted them a temporary injunction stopping the takeover of the board and allowing them to continue their superintendent search rather than have that be stopped. And have the board essentially get fired. However, the move had bipartisan support from the Texas legislature and the Texas legislature passed a bill in 2021 that clarified the commissioner's authority to go through with the plan. So it also allows him to grant district level privileges to a chosen conservator who would oversee the district in place of a superintendent. That was another issue in this case, as HISD claimed that Morath could not appoint a conservator to oversee the entire district and to stop their superintendent search.
Okay, so if the commissioner has legal authority to replace the board, what was the issue at hand during the meeting?
So HISD lawyers did not think that the law was enough to grant Morath the authority to replace the board, and they also believed that it was not relevant to the injunction at hand and the issue because they said that the injunction was in place prior to the new law being passed. So the hearing to that day was to discuss the previous law in regards to this injunction. HISD asserted that the court only needed to use prior information before the new law, and that the TEA should file a new motion for dismissal to be heard in a new trial court. The justices raised concern about totally ignoring the new law in regards to the suit, but seemed to give a little credence to HISD's claim that the TEA needed to file a new motion in court to get the injunction scrubbed. But there was no decision reached at the hearing, but we'll hopefully see what happens in the next couple weeks there.
Well, thank you, Hudson. Bradley, let's go back to chatting with you here. Governor Abbott announced a new economic development update here in Texas. Give us an update there.
So Wells Fargo announced it will build a $455 million campus in Irving to consolidate its 3,000 employee workforce in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. The state will provide a $5 million grant through the Texas Enterprise Fund, the largest award since 2019, and the company estimates the project will create 650 new jobs, although they didn't specify whether that's like temporary construction jobs or if it's new permanent jobs with the company. But it should be up and running by the end of 2025.
Got it. Well, thank you for covering that for us. We'll keep an eye, and it's always interesting to watch how these grants are doled out to different companies. So we keep an eye on that, and we thank you for that. Hudson, we're coming right back to you. San Antonio has been in the news a lot this week, both on the state and national level. Explain what happened with the San Antonio police officer and a young man in San Antonio.
Yeah, this is a pretty tragic story and something you really just hate to see the news. But last week, a San Antonio police officer attempted to apprehend someone that he thought was an individual who had evaded him the previous day. The officer was in his first year on the force. He walked up to the car of the man who was eating McDonald's in his car and opened his door and ordered them to exit the vehicle. The individual, 17-year-old Eric Cantu, then put the car in reverse, hitting the officer with the door of the car. And as Cantu was putting the car in drive, the officer pulled out his gun and opened fire on Cantu, unloading his magazine. Cantu was hit multiple times and is now on life support at a San Antonio hospital. The cop was fired from the police force a few days later, and the police union will not represent him as he was in his probationary period on the force.
And to be clear, there was also a 17-year-old female in the passenger seat as well who also suffered injuries, correct?
Yes, she is okay, not in critical condition, and she is not in the hospital right now.
Okay. Will the officer be charged for the shooting?
Yes, the officer has now been charged with 2 counts of aggravated assault by a public servant, which is a first-degree felony, and he has since turned himself into law enforcement, and he bonded out a couple days ago. But it is a very unfortunate and sad story, and something to keep looking at.
Yeah, well, thank you for ensuring our readers understand what went on there. Rob, we're going to come to you, my friend, and have you chat about some of the stories from our regional reporters that have been written by either Kim or Holly. And Rob, you're our assistant editor. You read these stories way before even I do, so you are well-versed on these issues. So why don't we go ahead and talk about a piece from Holly Hansen here that has caught quite a bit of attention.
Well, thank you. I'm supposed to be well-versed on these issues, but I'll do my absolute best.
Okay, do you also get to the point where you've read so many stories that you don't remember anything about them?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, if we're reading somewhere between 5 and 10 stories in a day, and at the end of the day, if you asked me to tell you what happened in the news, I would not know what it was.
Not know either. Okay.
I have this, sometimes I'm calling my parents driving home from work, and they're like, what happened today? And I'm like, I don't know.
I don't remember. I don't remember at all. I feel the exact same way. Or when somebody asks me to talk about y'all's stories like on the radio or something, I have to prepare. I have to go back and reread them because I don't remember what was in the stories. Anyways, there you go. Curious about about whether you actually have that happen to you as well. So I'm glad I'm not alone.
Indeed, not alone. So the Harris County's judges race is ramping up between Lena Hidalgo and Alexandra Del Moral Mueller. Mueller raised $4.9 million compared to Hidalgo's $1.15 million in this recent funding haul, outraising the incumbent by a factor of 4 to 1. She also spent about $3.5 million compared to Hidalgo spending just over $500,000. That's a factor of like 7 to 1. So oof. Mueller is definitely raising and spending a lot more money than Hidalgo is. Both of them receive small and large donations, sometimes as low as like $1 or $4. Mueller has been endorsed by the LaPorte Police Officers Association and the Houston Police Officers Union, so she's getting support from law enforcement. And Hidalgo has been endorsed by groups like the Way to Lead Texas PAC and the Jane Fonda Climate PAC, as well as union groups such as the American Federation of Teachers. So there's a bit of differences between the kinds of groups that are starting to endorse these candidates. The Houston Chronicle editorial board also endorsed Mueller, which came, I think,
which is shocking.
Yeah, I think it came as a bit of a surprise to people, but it's definitely an interesting read as to their reasoning why. Hidalgo also on Tuesday, when she left Harris County Commissioner's Court early, claiming that she was ill, she was booed as she left the room. Several people had showed up to speak on law enforcement funding issues, and she left because she claimed that she had been ill and she had to leave the meeting early. Several Republicans in Harris County Commissioner's Court have also been boycotting the meetings in order to prevent them from forming a quorum to vote on a proposed tax increase. So it's interesting seeing what's happening in Harris County Commissioner's Court. There's always something, and we might have a new Harris County judge, seeing what happens come November.
Yeah,
so
who knows? Polling is so hard to place any sort of validity on of results, but you never know, and it is an indicator of trend. So we'll see what happens come election day, and fundraising is a big indicator as well. So interesting to watch that, and great reporting from Holly. Make sure to go take some time and read those pieces, even just about the commissioner's court and the boycotting before the tax increase. It is quite something, and there's always drama going on in Harris County. Related to the Houston area is the Texas Central High-Speed Railway between Dallas and Houston. Our amazing reporter Kim Roberts has done an incredible job and kind of become the just the go-to gal for this issue and has been following it since the get-go. What updates has Kim provided on this project?
So in September, late September, over 90 Texas landowners sent a letter to Texas Central, which is the high-speed railway project. These landowners were frustrated because recently the Texas Supreme Court ruled in Texas Central's favor that they have eminent domain rights over these landowners' lands that they're trying to get so that they can build this railway. The landowners have also been frustrated with an apparent lack of progress and leadership on the issue, as the CEO of Texas Central, Carlos Aguilar, recently resigned. They're worried about an issue of lack of funding. You know, the landowners are wondering if this project is even going to happen at all, and whether or not, you know, their lands are going to be taken from them for a project that's going nowhere. In response to this letter, Texas Central's attorney sent a letter back saying that the landowners' questions had no legitimate purpose. He was basically saying that these questions were not relevant. You know, they can't share everything as part of certain business practices, right? So it was an interesting exchange of letters between these two groups over whether or not really Texas Central has a future. The landowners' letter also suggested, Kim reported this, that they might pursue a Rule 202 investigation of Texas Central, which would allow them to either depose Texas Central orally or in writing to, quote, investigate a potential claim or suit. So this is a project that's been going on for a long time now. You know, these landowners have been putting up a fight, and it'll be interesting to see what happens if Texas Central is going to make some more definite progress in the future, or maybe if these landowners are going to be able to prove that they can't. It'll just be interesting to see.
Absolutely. And Kim, make sure to go read Kim's reporting on that issue. Very thorough and intensive reporting from Kim Roberts. So great stuff. Thank you, Rob, for covering that for us. Let's move on to the tweetery section this week. Bradley, why don't we start with you?
The thing I noticed this week was down in the Texas 34 race between incumbent Mayra Flores and incumbent Vicente Gonzalez. I think we talked about this race last week a bit, but there was a picture floating around of an ad that Gonzalez's campaign ran against Flores, and it had a doctored photo of Mayra Flores on it, and it doctored by it looks like they drew on eyebrows, like angry eyebrows on her picture, just to make her look more menacing. Now, this is something campaigns, maybe not going as far as doctoring photos, but finding the most unflattering photo. That happens quite a bit. Obviously doesn't make it right, but it is common. Now, this kind of takes it to a different level. They put it in like a black and white film, and it's a picture of Flores holding a looks like an AR pistol, but they basically just took her eyebrows and stretched them down to make her look angry and menacing. Very strange.
Yeah,
caught a lot of flack. Fox News picked it up.
Was this a campaign? Like, was it paid for by? Do we know whether it was paid for by his campaign or if it was like a PAC who did it on his behalf? Like, because that happens a lot. Is a PAC will send out a mailer on behalf of a candidate or even just against their opponent without the candidate's knowledge of what's being sent.
Yeah, it was from Gonzalez's campaign.
Oof. Okay. Yeah. There you go.
Yeah.
And that does not mean, like, the candidate oftentimes may not know what's being sent out, but the campaign, anyway, a lot of times they do. You just don't know. You don't know. Yeah.
And it just really illustrates how kind of brutal and heated this race has been. Gosh, it is probably the most watched in Texas, especially with it's now rated a toss-up, as I talked about last week. And so it's really up for grabs, and both candidates are really campaigning hard, and both parties, both the nationwide GOP and the DCCC are involved heavily in this race, spending a lot of money. It's basically
and two high
all for
profile
taking.
folks as well. Like
Yeah.
two very different politically people, like two people who are very different politically, but at the same time have pretty big profiles.
Yeah.
For very different reasons.
Well, Gonzalez has been in office for years, and Flores is currently in office because she shockingly won the special election. And about that special election, Gonzalez recently said that the election was stolen. He was more referring
That's
to
quite something.
Yeah, he was more referring to the money that was put in from outside Republican
That election
groups.
frog. No,
Election frog.
Oh my gosh.
Election frog.
Guys.
Ribbit.
Oh my gosh. Not election fraud, but just a lot of money being dumped in is what he said.
Yeah, that seemed to be what he was getting at, but that's not exactly what he said.
He did say election frog. We'll go on the record.
Yes, ribbit.
Okay.
So yes, this race is something to watch, and it just
Oh, boy.
continues to get more and more personal.
Absolutely. Thank you, Bradley. Hayden, what did you see?
All I can think about is frogs right now.
Well, I hope that helped with your stage fright.
It did. Thank
okay,
you.
good.
I saw a tweet from Insider and I didn't read the whole thing, so just full disclosure. Well, I read the tweet, but not the article that was linked to the tweet.
If you didn't read the whole tweet, that's a whole other level of not being able to.
Yeah, that's taking it to extremes. But it is about a micronation in Nevada called the Republic, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, the Republic of Malasha, and it has 35 people in it.
Is that different from the People's Republic of Malaysia?
Yeah, I guess so.
They
Maybe
must have
there's
split off from the Civil War back in the 80s.
Yes.
yeah, probably. And it is a little self-proclaimed country in Nevada, and they use cookie dough as their currency.
Stop.
Or they use the value of cookie dough as their currency.
Okay, so not just like trading sticky cookie dough to buy
but their currency is, I don't remember what it's called. I'm looking at the Twitter thread to see.
I wonder if it's pegged to the dollar.
It's pegged to the value of cookie dough. And
What is the trading value of cookie dough?
I don't know.
Hayden's not prepared for these questions.
I'm not
people.
prepared. I'm not
This
the
is-
PR representative for the Republic of Malaysia, but it has a president who describes himself as a benevolent dictator, and he asked the interviewer to call him Your Excellency.
The
It
big
has-
king.
These pictures of him, it looks like he bought his sash off of Amazon.
It does. And this country has its own flag. It has its own navy that, I kid you not, is composed of 2 kayaks in a lake.
Stop. Are you serious?
And he says he basically ignores the United States, even though he said they're dependent on the U.S. for economic reasons, and they buy all of their stuff at Walmart.
So it's not like a cult. It's just a nation.
No, and when you
There's
read...
no religious...
No, it's not religious or anything. When you read the quotes from him, it doesn't sound like he's crazy. It just sounds like he's having a really good time with this. And he said in some of these quotes, he was like, "We're having a lot of fun." And he said that they basically have dual citizenship with the U.S. He said, quote, "Otherwise we wouldn't be able to go to Walmart and we'd all starve to death," end quote.
Stop.
And he calls, he says they pay taxes to the U.S. and any benefits they get from the U.S. government. It said in this tweet, he jokingly refers to it as foreign aid. And then it has a picture of a sign marking the boundary between the USA and the
Stop.
Republic of Malaysia.
Oh my gosh. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, yeah, that sign is something else. That sign does not look like it was got off of Amazon. That looks like hand painted or something.
What else is on here? It says the time zone is 39 minutes ahead.
Okay, the 35 citizens are all related to this guy. This number, he said, also includes the family's 3 dogs. Wow.
I think we should specify that the Malaysian currency, the Valora, is subdivided into 100 futros and is pegged to the relative value of Pillsbury cookie dough specifically.
Okay.
That makes me really want like just a bite of cookie dough.
Is it a per unit price of cookie dough or a package?
Seems to be. Seems to be.
Who knows? Okay. Well, Hayden, that made my entire day. And I pity the man who will be going next, Hudson. because that was really... Actually, I don't, because Hudson also has a really fun story I want to talk about.
Very good news.
Last week you talked about the fattest bear week.
Yes.
Where are we at?
You know, they had to fight through some election fraud of their own.
Ballot frogs.
Yeah, election frog. But so there were like 10,000 votes apparently that were like bots or whatever, and so they had to get rid of those because they were skewing the count, which was really unfortunate for our free and fair democratic elections of fat bears. But Bear 747 won, which I think is aptly named, a big boy. He seems, describing him, he is a brown bear, a grizzly bear, and he is very round. And I think they guesstimate that he is over 1,000 pounds, and so you can kind of guess how big that is. It's pretty big.
That's half a ton. This bear weighs half a ton.
Legitimately half a ton. But yeah.
My favorite headline, because I looked it up, it's an NPR headline. Scandal rocks Fat Bear Week, but the contestants are unperturbed. That's literally
that's a good headline.
NPR headline. Also, I love that the bear's name is 747.
Yeah.
Such a good name for a fat bear.
Last year's winner was Otis.
That's right.
And I'm
are people mad that Otis didn't win again?
What?
Are people were mad?
I don't know about all the lore behind all this.
Okay.
So.
Well, this bear, you should look up this bear. He definitely looks very, I mean, he's fat. Just fat. He's just big. That cannot be healthy for him. Okay. Well, thank you, Hudson, for that update. That made my day also. So many good fun tweets this week. Rob, we're coming to you on something that's more just ridiculously crazy. Talk to us about what you are going to talk about.
Indeed. So for a little while now, there has been a defamation suit against InfoWars founder Alex Jones over claims that he has defamed the families of the families whose children died in the Sandy Hook shooting in 2012. And so just this week, the verdict was reached and the jury decided that Jones has to pay $965 million to the families as well as to an FBI agent that he defamed, claiming that they and their children were actors and that the shooting was fake. The families had been harassed for basically a decade by fans of Alex Jones and believers in this conspiracy theory. Some of them had to move multiple times, if I recall correctly. So it's a huge jury sum, though. I mean, this is nearly $1 billion for a guy who has I think they estimated in court somewhere around $270 million in the bank.
Oof.
So,
which is honestly even more than I would have thought. That's
a
lot of money that he has in the bank, supposedly.
Yeah, so we'll see how much of that actually makes it to the victims in this case. We'll see how much of that money is going to go to them. I don't see how he can pay that off, or we'll see if InfoWars goes totally bankrupt or something. But it's definitely been a very interesting case to follow, and it's already generating quite a bit of discussion online.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, definitely check out those tweets, folks. They're
I'm picturing Alex Jones just Googling side hustles to pay $1 billion judgment.
Maybe he'll have to sell that like tank he drives around Austin.
Now, I know we might have talked about this before, but that huge InfoWars truck, I think we should turn it into a huge Texan truck. The Texan should get that truck and drive it around.
That'd be pretty cool. Maybe we'll buy it from Alex Jones.
Not that we're in any way comparing ourselves to InfoWars.
No,
Absolutely
not
not.
even close. Yes, let's be very clear.
Yeah, I just wanted to make that abundantly crystal.
I got excited about a truck. Thank you, Hayden. Yeah, spicy stuff. Okay, I got a tweet this week. As last weekend, I went to ACL, Austin City Limits, the festival, which was something I don't know. I'm not a big festival person. I'm sure that's shocking to all of you, but I'm just not. But ACL is definitely more family friendly in a lot of ways and also not family friendly. It's like a mix of crazy festival goers and the smell of weed and also like families who came down from Georgetown to have their kids watch artists that they like. So it's a very interesting conglomeration of people and it was pretty fun to experience. I went on Saturday. On Sunday, I was not there, but Casey Musgraves performed. Very notably, she She sang one of her big... What song even is this? I can't even remember which song this is of hers. I can sing it in my head, but I can't remember the title. But she said a classic line from her song and called out Texas junior senator, which I thought was very interesting. It was the lyric goes, because everyone knows someone who kills the buzz every time they open their mouth. And then she yelled, Ted Cruz. And the crowd freaked out. And of course, then Texas journos had a lot of fun with that. And yeah, it made its rounds on Twitter, to say the least. But interesting stuff. I think there were multiple artists as well that called out Ted Cruz over the course of the weekend, which is interesting. Very, very interesting. But they all love coming to Austin. They all love coming down for ACL. But that's my tweet. Okay, let's talk about a fun topic. This weekend, I'm going to California with my sister for her bachelorette party. We're going to Santa Barbara for kind of a chill girls weekend. We'll eat a lot of food. Maybe go wine tasting. It'll be delightful. She doesn't know the itinerary, but it'll be really fun. But I wanted to say California really is, I think, the prettiest city in the U.S. Or excuse me, I can't speak today. California is not a city. It is a state. It is a full-on state, the most populated state in the union. Regardless, I really do think in a lot of ways it is the prettiest state, but it's almost feels illegal to say that as somebody who lives in and loves Texas.
It's the People's Republic of California.
There you go. Maybe that's the clarification needed for it.
Texas Customs is already processing your deportation paperwork for saying that.
That's good to know. I figured. I mean, it's deservedly so.
There's a car waiting for you outside.
But like, I mean, what other
right
state?
This way, ma'am.
Oh my gosh! I mean, what other state has just that level of beauty, like that beachfront, the weather?
California has
mountains,
the range,
wineries, and literally everything.
It's
like
got the
wine
range,
country.
But I would say just like overall, I'm probably gonna have to go with like Colorado.
Oh. Yes.
I'm probably going to have to give them the title because they have just a lot of cool stuff pretty much everywhere around the state. Or maybe a New England state just because of the vibes.
Just because of the vibes.
Maybe like a New Hampshire, Vermont, or a Maine.
Like the leaves in the fall kind of vibes. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, like the scary Stephen King vibes.
Ooh. I've actually only been as far up north as Pennsylvania in New England, which I think Pennsylvania still counts as New England. Anyway, I'm not quite sure. Maybe it's not far enough north. Okay, so Colorado. I think that's a great one. I love Colorado. Hayden, do you have an opinion on this?
Yeah, Hudson stole my answer. I was going to say, well, not Colorado, but New England.
Oh.
I don't picture myself staying in Texas forever.
Yeah? Could you move to New England? Is that someplace you think you could live?
That's where I would more than likely
I could see you starting a maple syrup farm in Vermont.
A maple syrup farm?
I can totally see Hayden having like the Carhartt jacket and going out and tapping the maple trees. You know what I'm saying?
Oh.
Can you handle the cold, Hayden?
I would prefer it a lot more than this 90 degrees in October BS that we've been dealing with the past few weeks.
I was going to say this is something that the one thing that the North definitely has over the South is that they have these things called seasons where like it gets colder and then it gets warmer again and like the leaves change color.
Sorry, I just knocked you there. Were you saying we as in the North because you were still identifying as a Hillsdale student?
No, did I say we?
You said in the North we, like, yeah, you said we.
Oh, I meant to say something that they still have over the South. When I said we, I probably meant the South. I can't talk no good.
Well, that makes two of us. Brad, will you say Michigan?
I'm going to go to bat for Michigan. Yeah. I think especially northern Michigan is extremely underrated. Traverse City, Mackinac Island, hell, I think where Hillsdale is in southwest Michigan is beautiful. The only place that is kind of a knock against it is Detroit.
Yeah.
Which I have a fondness for, but it is objectively disgusting.
Objectively disgusting.
Would you say Michigan,
right along with its sports teams.
Would you say Michigan compares to like Colorado though?
I've never been to Colorado.
I think Minnesota's better than Michigan. I'll say
really?
That. The Boundary Waters, all the lakes.
Been to a lot of football games in Ann Arbor.
Oh, I've heard that's
central.
Gorgeous.
Good one.
And in the fall, leaves actually changing colors. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm gonna say Michigan.
Okay. Very good. Rob, did you already say which state you thought was the prettiest in the US? Also, I'm getting hiccups now. This is great.
I'm trying to think right now because I spent several years in Michigan, and Michigan is a very, very nice state. Honestly, the natural environment you get there, the snow was great. I would love waking up to like freshly fallen snow covering everything, which is an experience that you don't get as much in Texas, or hopefully we won't.
And when you do, the power grid collapses.
So hopefully that will not happen again to the point where it will cause power grid collapse. But in terms of prettiest, I do quite like Texas when I'm driving around the state, and I can just sort of drive through and I see all the wide open skies and everything. It's very, very nice.
Yeah.
Very nice. I visited Oregon a few weeks ago, and in Portland, Oregon, and it almost made me claustrophobic. When I finally got back to Texas, I was like, oh, I can see
because of all the trees. Was it the trees?
The trees, the hills. It's a weirdly designed city.
It is very weird. I have a big affinity for Portland in a lot of ways, and its history, but I understand if you're not used to the Pacific Northwest, having grown up in Seattle, it can feel claustrophobic when you have Texas that's just flat and wide open with a bunch of not as many tall trees. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Enter Brad saying he's contractually obligated. Regardless, we are so grateful to y'all for listening to us blather about the news each and every week and about other things like fat bears. But thank you for listening, and we will catch you on next week's episode. Thank you to everyone for listening. If you enjoy our show, rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you want more of our stories, subscribe to The Texan at thetexan.news. Follow us on social media for the latest in Texas politics, and send any questions for our team to our mailbag by DMing us on Twitter or shooting an email to editor@thetexan.news. We are funded entirely by readers and listeners like you, so thank you again for your support. Tune in next week for another episode of our weekly Roundup. God bless you, and God bless Texas.